Hi everyone, welcome to week 9 of Advanced Programming with Java. We are getting on towards the end, and it appears the plague has started the class. I won't fault anybody for not coming to class. Hopefully people can get the information experience that they need to be successful in these last couple of weeks. I realize we are certainly under extraordinary circumstances. So let's see here. Tonight, we'll do Prime Minister's questions. People hopefully are starting to dive into Android in earnest, and so I'll do a little bit of setup and sort of walking you through some things. And then, actually, anybody here from mob programming? Anybody who hasn't mob programmed yet? So, okay, a couple people need some mob programming. Cool. So we'll definitely do some tonight. Then we'll do a minesweeper. Okay. Well, let's get started then. What can I tell you? How was your REST project? Your project 5s? Yeah. Okay. It was all right. Okay. Good. What was that? Worst one. So, like, what was challenging about it?
Honestly, it's just purely personal. I'm just doing
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's been a long term, hasn't it? And, yeah.
Full-time working with kids.
Yeah.
Okay. But it was really interesting, and I thought it was a fascinating learning experience.
Good.
Yeah.
That's something different learning. Yeah.
I was going to say the very large number of different kinds of exceptions that you can get.
Oh.
That were kind of okay, because they're hidden in some of the helper classes that are already defined for us.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to accommodate those as well and figure out what exactly calls an I/O exception, what exactly throws a REST exception,
Mm-hmm.
and coming up with the same way of success that.
Oh, nice. Yeah, yeah. Sometimes the helper classes aren't that helpful. No, I don't know. All part of the learning experience. Cool. Yeah, and this is what it's part of the assignment. So don't like feel bad and stuff. It's like, wow, this is like completely different. Yes, it's completely different, and it's meant to, be just an order of magnitude more challenging. There are multiple processes and stuff. And then, I think you'll find in the last couple of weeks here that Android also is just a different beast. But it's all Java. It's hopefully a lot of the, hopefully you reach the syntax by now. And what you'll be able to focus on in your projects is really understanding the tools that you're working with. And so then tools for working with REST and doing server-side programming, web server programming for the servlet in Project 5, and then Android stuff in Project 6. Let's see here. What else? Any other questions about your Project 5 or people start on Project 6 yet? No, not so much, a little bit. Okay. Does everybody have their environment up and running for Project 6? I've been asking you to do over the last couple of weeks. Okay, good. Everybody, okay. Because honestly, I think when it comes to like the tricky things, that's really like the big thing. I remember last time when I taught it, there were a couple of people that just had like underpowered machines or were running some weird operating system, and Android Studio didn't run very well on it. Those are the things that I don't have like canned answers to, and it's hard to find stuff on the internet. Okay. Yeah.
I have an unrelated question.
Yep.
Just in terms of long-term planning.
Mm-hmm.
For the final exam,
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure how to go about studying that. Are they starting early?
I normally go over the final exam next week, and that should give you an indication of how much I expect you to prepare for it. So, the final exam is, 12 points of your grade this time. I think that's right. Now let's go check. I want to make sure I'm giving accurate information. Course syllabus. Final exam, 12%. Okay, so 12%. Compare that to other chunks of work in the class, right? Your project 6 is worth, as a matter of fact, project 6 isn't worth as much as I'd like it to be worth because there's lots of projects this term. It's worth 12 points also. Your project 5 was worth 8. So it's basically like, and your quizzes are worth 3. So it's like 4 quiz grades. And again, I'll go into more details next week, but that's kind of what it's going to be like. It's going to be like a couple of quizzes rolled into one. So in terms of studying for it, it's conceptual, and there's some details in there that you'll need to know. But I'd like to think that if you've reviewed the materials and have a good idea of what's covered in all the lectures and have understood the details of the assignments, like how to do things like write the file and how to do things like build an Android application, you'll be fine. So it's not tricky, and it's not one of these things where I'm going to, at least I hope it's not tricky, and it's not one of these things where I'm trying to use that to determine your grade, because even though it's worth 12 points, it's, anyway. So, and like half of it is kind of a either you did or you didn't. So we'll talk more next week. But if you're going to focus on something in the next 2 weeks, really it's only 2 weeks? Yeah. Next 2 weeks, it should be on your Project 6. You'll enjoy that more, you'll get more out of it, and honestly, it'll probably impact your grade more than trying to like memorize everything in the, on the slides. Okay, yeah? Assuming your Project 5 needs your XML dumper and XML parser, and it should, so yes, please submit them. Yep, submit all of the code that you need.
So I submitted it. I don't think it's submitted by.
Okay, submit it again. Yeah, don't worry about it. Yep. Okay, anything else? Okay, Android. Okay. I've been teaching this course for almost 20 years now. I've been teaching Android, this is my second. And I'll be honest, it shows. So where I personally feel very comfortable with obviously all the Java APIs and everything up to this point, Android is something where I don't necessarily have all the answers at my fingertips. So then, you know, hopefully I'm just farther enough ahead of you guys so that I can seem mildly competent. I just want to put that disclaimer out there as we start exploring it and what it's all about. So there might be some times where I need to like go hit up Stack Overflow or something to figure out what the hell I'm doing wrong, or I'll have to refer back to the API documentation. So let's see here. The best, and so I'm also going to be winging it. So I'll say things like, let's see here, often and whatnot. So let's take a look at Project 6 and start with the project. Okay. So we already covered all the detail. I think really where I want to start is creating a new project. Oops. Let me open up the tab over here. Okay, so hopefully you've reviewed the Android lectures, or at least the first one, to get an idea of what Android's all about. I think everybody knows what like an Android device is. It's a phone. And so then when honestly, Google and their compatriots set out to create a competitor to the iPhone. They thought, okay, well, what do we need in a platform for running on the phone? And so they made some kind of fundamental choices about, first of all, you know, the hardware and what the hardware constrains you to. So there are things like, of course, the power of the device, right? You know, the faster the CPU, the more heat and battery it's going to take. Oh, it's a battery-powered device. You need to be cognizant of that. And of course, then there's the size of the device. We need to have a platform that can support, you know, very small screens, and you know, in these days, very big screens too, right? You can have like large displays that run Android. And then they, thought of the programming. What it's like to develop in it, what it's like to program in it. And at the time, Java was like the language that everybody knew. And they said, okay, well, let's write in Java. And then Oracle, when they bought Sun Microsystems, started suing people over it. And so they're like, okay, well, we might still use the Java language, but we won't use the same runtime. So they've got this runtime called the ART, the Android runtime, that they use. But as far as developers concerned, you can write in Java. Actually, you can write in other languages too. They're really hot on Kotlin right now, which is a language that the people that wrote IntelliJ implemented that has some nice improvements over Java. And then they were like, okay, well, what kind of tooling are we going to provide our developers? We want to provide them with a really good experience. And for a while, they went to develop Google went and developed their own set of tools for developing Android applications. But then a couple years ago, they decided, well, you know what? IntelliJ is a really good platform for for having a good developer experience, let's just use that. So there's something called Android Studio, which is a customized version of IntelliJ that is all about developing Android applications. And so that's what I recommend that you use. That's what we'll be using here. So I'm going to go over to Android Studio right now. And what I'm going to do, sorry, I've been working on a different project, so I'll close this one. I'm going to create a new project, and this will be in my, let's see here. Yeah, I'll just do it here then. Okay, I'll do it in my Portland State Java Winter 2020. Okay, I'll create a new, so here, start a new Android Studio project. I want to start it with, I'm just going to start an empty activity, I guess. Okay, so sorry, Android. So there's something called an activity. And an activity, I think the easiest way to think about it, or the way to think about it initially, is that's a screen that you look at. It's something that the user interacts with, right? So it's an activity that does something. And so then Android Studio gives you like this whole assortment of activities to start with, things that will get you, started really easily with different things. I'm just going to try an empty activity just as something easy to get started with. So this is what you're going to do. So you'll start and, and I guess another thing about the Android project is that use your imagination. Be creative. Just be forewarned that there's some really advanced stuff here. So you're like, wow, I want to try like go back and I want to choose something, crazy like a master detail flow. I wonder what that's all about. Nice. Go for it. But remember, you've only got a couple weeks left before it's due. And so you got to balance the exploration and the creativity of the user experience and working with Android with the practical, constraint of you need to get this done. You need to get this done and working. So anyway, I'm just going to choose an empty activity for mine. I'm going to call it, I don't know. Am I going to write an airline tonight? No, I should find a different domain to play with. We'll figure. Oh, okay. Hey, how about something boring like a calculator? Okay. Here's your package name. All this good stuff. I don't want it in that directory. I want it in this directory, and then I want to call it, yes, and I want to call it Android Calculator. I want it in Java, minimum SDK, just so the SDK is a software development kit. For this class, just choose the minimum one. It's cool. It tells you that your app will run on like 99.6% of devices. Sweet. And I don't think you need to use the Android support libraries. Okay, so what this is going to do then, let's see here. Would you like to install a shell script formatter? No. No, I would not. Okay. Oh, and it's telling me that there's an update to Android Studio. I just ran this like the other day. Well, not tonight. I think I'll be okay. Oops, come on, scroll. Oh, I scroll. Oh, that's not what the scroll I wanted. How do I make this bigger? Control plus. Sorry, I thought it was Command Scroll that made it bigger, but okay. So one thing that I found about Android Studio is that it's just a little bit different from IntelliJ, and so then there are some things that are different. Actually, I've probably even got the. Do I have? Yeah. Okay. There's two sets of key bindings. There's a whole bunch of old key bindings that I'm used to, and there's like the new modern ones that I'm trying to teach myself to use. So I have Android Studio in the modern key bindings to try to move me into the 2010s. Okay. So anyway, can you see that, or do I need to make it bigger? Okay. Yep. Okay. Sorry. How do I make it bigger? Is this under preferences? And then size.
Editor font.
Thank you. Size. There you go. Let's use 16. Is that better? Let's try that. Okay, a little better. Speak up if you can't see it. Can't see it? That's fine. Okay. Points. Boy, that's better. Better. Okay, cool. Okay, so this creates a new project. Before I walk through the code, let's just make sure everything builds, and we'll get stuff into GitHub. Okay. Android applications don't use Maven to build themselves. They use the successor to Maven called Gradle. So then it's kind of a different command line environment for you. But some things are familiar, like you have a Gradle wrapper. So Gradle wrapper, and you have some instructions that might seem familiar, like clean and build. I think here I talk about how am I going to run the application. I'll use, I guess, install debug. I'll use Gradle w build to build it. So I'll just do this. This is how you build your application from the command line. Always good to build it from the command line yourself, because that's what I'm going to do. Just thinking about it. So when you build an Android application, more so than even like your Project 5, there are all sorts of build steps. And so then there's source code that needs to be compiled into something that can run on the runtime. There are resources, which you'll learn about in the second lecture, that some of them do get compiled. This is things like images and whatnot. That all gets compiled into stuff that ultimately gets bundled into, well, your Android executable that can then be deployed onto a Android device. Hooray, I've done that. Okay. So now I recommend that you do most of your work in Android Studio. So it's built, okay. Now we're going to run it. So I'm not going to cover it here, but whatever it was, a couple weeks ago, there's this part 0 to one of the lectures where I go through the whole process of downloading, installing, and getting it so that you can run the emulator. So I'm not going to cover that again. I already have my Pixel 2 API 29 emulator there, and so I can click Run, and this will launch the emulator. Let's see here. Oh, that was what was previously on my emulator. That's one of my other examples. And so it's now it's installing the application. It's going to launch the application in the emulator. And there you go. There's my Android calculator. And there's basically nothing you can interact with, and that's fine. We'll start adding some stuff shortly. So this is my my application right there. And this is the cool thing about Android is that they have, well, emulators for all these different devices so that you can see what your application will look like when running on an actual device. And it's got all sorts of fun things that you can explore. So anyway, so you can actually, I'm not going to kill it just yet. Okay, so let's see here. I think we're good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to check some stuff into version control. Oops, 72 files. Gadzooks. So I'm going to, let's see here. Is this group by? Nope. Is this group by? Yeah, group by, what directory? Oh, first Android app? I don't need that. Why is that even there? Yeah, I'm just going to delete that. It's probably an old attempt. Just do it from command line. Yeah. Okay. So all sorts of files to get checked in. All sorts of good stuff. Okay, great. We will do a tour of this shortly, but first I'm going to add all of those to GitHub, and I'm going to check them in. As I added a new Android application, and I'll push that up to GitHub. Yep. Okay, now let's take a tour through what comes out of the box here because they give some good examples of stuff. So, actually, let's see, I can't expand all, but I'll start at the beginning. Okay, the Android manifest. The Android manifest is a, let me make this big. I didn't want to make it that big, I guess. Oops, not resource project. So the Android manifest is a big old configuration XML file that configures information about the application. And so things like, well, there's some display things like what the label is. I think that's the, let's see here, Android calculator that appears there. And I think also it'll appear places, well, so if I go back to home and let's see here. Oh, no, wait, that's, yeah, there you go, Android calculator. It appears right there. So like that. I think something that's important is that there is this, you can define the activities. Actually, you have to, right? I think, yeah, you have to define all of your activities in your, actually you don't have to define all the activities, but one of the activities that you do define in your Android manifest is what's called the main activity. So this is the first activity that's displayed by your application. And so then, and the way you do this is with this thing called an intent filter. Intents are important, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. Anyway, but this all comes out of the box. You probably don't need to change it very much. Oh, one of the things, and sorry, these are kind of random thoughts that are coming to my head, but when it comes to submitting all of your code, you submit all of your code. So things like the Android, the Android manifest and everything in your resource directory, which we'll talk about later. All of that gets submitted. Unlike your previous projects, where I'm trying to put some guardrails on what you do and what libraries you add, you can do whatever you want for Android. I want you to explore here. So that's the Android manifest. There's also other stuff like permissions and whatever you can add in there. Nice thing about one of the nice things about Android Studio is that it does a lot of the management of your manifest for you, or it gives you really nice hints like, oh, you need to add this to your manifest. Let's look at some Java code next. Here is your here's your activity. So activities have a class, are represented by a class or an instance of a class. It's a lot like a servlet in that you've got this, you write the code, you write the class, and it's up to the runtime to instantiate that class and then sort of register it in a place that will receive events. So it's one of those things. So there's no main method where you go invoke new main activity. Nope, it's all done reflectively by the Android runtime. So you can watch the lectures to learn all about activities. Activities have a life cycle. One of the, early in their life cycle, probably the earliest state in their life cycle is the created state. And when an activity enters the created state, the onCreate callback method is invoked. And so you override onCreate. It's a lot like, it's kind of like overriding doPost or doGet in your servlet, in that somebody else calls it. And here it's like, okay, great, I'm being created. You can get some configuration information, what's called a bundle. And so you always call super.onCreate first. And then one of the things that the onCreate method should do is initialize the UI. And so the way it does this is it calls this setContentView method with a reference to a layout. And actually, how about we just go in that now? Look at that now. So UIs in Android are built with Java objects. You have this entire API that represents all these UI widgets. So buttons and text fields and lists of things and sliders and all that stuff are represented as Java objects. It kind of makes sense. And because they're at runtime, your activity has all of these objects, and as the user interacts with objects, the activity can say, oh, great, when the user clicks on this button, here's what it should do. So there's this relationship between the activity and the UI. However, using the Java programming language to create and configure and hook up all of these UI objects is really kind of awkward, right? It's a lot of code. It doesn't look all that great. So while you can do it that way, the preferred way to do it is to create your layout in an XML file. So we're just going to get rid of that here. And so there's an XML file that declaratively your layout, and it looks something like this. So every element, every tag, is some UI. Well, is a view, is a widget or a view group, which is a container of other views. And then you configure it with the attributes of that XML element. So here's probably the easiest one to understand in all of this. There's something called a text view. And this actually corresponds, I guess you can't see it, but it's android.widget.textView, right? So this represents the text view object. And actually, text view, it's a Java object. We can go find the UI. So the Android documentation is really nice. So you can just look up text view. Let's see here, pages, references, Android widget text view. And you've got JavaDoc essentially, right, where it's talking about, okay, here's a class hierarchy. Here's how to use it inside the XML layout. And okay, here's how to interact with it in the Java code. And then it's got, well, all the stuff you expect in a JavaDoc in JavaDoc, including all of these XML attributes. These are things that you can set on it. It's not terribly interesting. I don't know if there's anything here I want to display, or I want to give you an example of. We'll see some stuff later as examples. But then it's also got constructors and methods that you can invoke on it. So certainly things like, hey, text value, go set the text to be displayed to a certain value, or maybe get the text that the user entered if it's an edit text. And we'll see that later. So anyway, these are Java objects when it comes down to it, and so you can configure it here. In addition to sort of declaring here's the widget, you need to configure some information about how it's laid out with respect to its parent. So what we're doing here, and actually you can sort of see it over here on the right. Over here on the right, you get this nice preview of what it'll look like, I guess, in sort of like light mode and dark mode. Let's see here, app theme. Yeah, you have light. I guess you can change the theme a little bit. Yeah, I don't know what it's saying. You can see it in different themes. And as you navigate the XML file, it'll highlight different things. So like here's the text view with hello world in it. And so, well, maybe you can't see that if you're sitting in the back. But it says hello world there. And actually, this is a WYSIWYG. That makes me sound like I'm from the 80s. And I kind of am. Where you can do things like you can change so you should be able to change the size. Well, maybe you can't on this one. There you go. You can make it a little bigger. You can, I don't know, change its size. There's the margins, I guess. So you can put some margins around it. Doesn't really help in this layout. Constraints. Oh, I guess these squiggly lines represent constraints on it. So you say like, and you'll probably notice, good, you can see with a change bar. When I change the size of it, all of a sudden the layout and width, which used to be wrap content, which means, hey, just make me big enough to display my contents, well, now has this very specific value because I changed it. And so here are the constraints. It's basically saying, hey, put it basically in the middle of the parent because the bottom, left, right, and top constraints are all relative to the parent. This is kind of some exciting stuff with the constraint layout, if that's something that you want to explore. When I write this stuff by hand, I kind of use the basic layouts because I tend to understand them. But if you want to use the editor to make yourself like a really cool looking layout, cool, that's great. It's just that might be more complex than you realize. So we're going to revert those changes. Have any of you guys used sort of like a layout tool like this before and stuff? Yeah.
There's Glade for C++.
Glade.
Visual Studio has a similar one for C# libraries.
Okay, yeah, right. Visual Basic, no one? Okay, good. Good. I'm glad no one's still using that. Okay, cool. So what I find, and we'll do this in a little bit, is that you end up going back and forth between the XML file to create some stuff, and then your Java code to interact with it. So you'll have this XML file, and we'll change that later. Now the XML file resides in inside the resource directory, or res. So there's, I don't know if that's readable or not. There's all sorts of stuff in here, and I go into details about it in the lecture. But in addition to code, there's a whole bunch of static files. Some of it's configuration, and some of it is our resources like PNGs for various sizes of screen. One of the interesting things about Android applications is that the actual application, the thing that's bundled and like put up on Google Play or wherever the marketplace is that you get it from, is that it can support a whole bunch of different kinds of devices with different screen sizes, with different capabilities. So some might have, I don't know, accelerometers or different kinds of cameras and stuff like that. So, part of when you design an Android application for realsies, you need to think about like what environment it'll be running in, and so it might mean that you have to have an application that runs your same application to run both on a phone with a small form factor and maybe a tablet with a slightly larger form factor, and that actually gives you flexibility in terms of how your layouts look, how the screen flows. It's all choices that you need to make as a developer of the application. And those various different options, like for instance here in the IC launcher directory, here are a whole different bunch of PNGs for different screen densities. And so, these are the kinds of things you have to support. Probably more relevant are things in this in the values directory, and the values directory have various XML files that configure certain things. So here is for instance, here are some colors that are defined for your application. So let me bring the application back up again. Let me bring my application back up over here so we can see it better. So the application defines some colors named like color primary, and color dark, and color accent. And yeah, maybe those are different colors. I don't really see the accent color over here, but I'm pretty sure that primary dark might be the darker purple or darker blue up here, and then color primary is the one here. I believe these are used by the theme, and so it lets you customize your application. And I'm sure Android lets you. It's nice, it gives you this little color highlight here, but now you can change it. And so you can make it, I don't know, reddish or something. Let's see what happens when we then redeploy. We'll probably just want to redeploy that way. See if it changes anything. This is where I'm kind of making it up as I go along. Oh, somebody's bouncing on me? Oh, is that? There it is. It stopped it. It restarted it. And hey, look, now it's red up top. Okay, neat. Learn all sorts of cool stuff in class. Okay. So that's what colors is. Something you can change or not change. Similarly, oh yeah, styles. Okay, this is neat. So this is so this is where you define the theme. Actually, well, this is one place you define the theme. Actually, the theme is here, defined here in the manifest with the Android theme tag, and good old Android Studio lets you easily navigate to this, @style /app theme. And actually, when you see @style, yeah, this is so interesting. There's a styles.xml file, and that gets compiled into this thing you can reference with @style, so it's singular versus plural. And it's got a name of app theme. Cool. And so you can say, yeah, this is descends from this dark action bar theme, which was all what we chose in that wizard at the very beginning. And here is where you can customize it, and it's because we have items inside of style, and then you have these color primary, color dark, and color accent, which then refer to things from your colors.xml, the primary dark, and the accent. So the idea is that you've got all of these configuration files, and you can reference them with things that begin with @. Okay, one more thing that's interesting. Here you have the label for the Android application, and here that was it shows up here. It shows up with the name on that screen where you launch it. This is highlighted in green in Android Studio, and if you hover over it, it pops up this thing saying, "Well, this is really a reference off to a string." So at string.appname. So if I then navigate into that, this takes me to the strings.xml file, and so this is where you define all of your display strings. So when you are building any application, but it's especially important for things that have user interfaces, you want to make your applications localizable, meaning that you can translate the strings into whatever language that the user is using. And it's not just like the words. There's also different date formats, right? We learned about this back when we were in Project 3 or whatever, where we started using the date format. So localization is a very important thing in application development, and so it's a first-class citizen here in Android. And so then one of the things that you'll see is that Android Studio, and as a matter of fact, I'm surprised it didn't. If I go back to my activity main, interesting. Normally, I would expect. There we go. I would expect IntelliJ to kind of complain to me, saying, "Hey, this piece of text right here should be in a display string." And if I say, Option Enter to sort of give me the, "Hey, help me do something like here," it says, extract string resource. So it's a very helpful refactoring that IntelliJ has, and we'll just call it, hello underbar world. And this will automatically create a new entry in the strings.xml file named hello world. And so what you can do, I don't have a good example of it, but what you can do then is have strings.xml files for different locales. And so then based on the locale that your application's running in, it can display things in different languages, which is nice. So this is sort of a best practice for developing Android applications. I want to pause here for questions. So I'm sort of giving you the lay of the land, looking at some of the different files that are created in Android Studio. Any questions so far? Yeah.
That's been clear, but I was just thinking about Untitled
Yeah.
and how we're looking at airline, and I was thinking about if we're bringing a project file over.
Yep.
Where the references to say the abstract airline and things like that we didn't actually.
Oh yeah, I need to.
How do we do that?
Let's figure that out. Yes, right. So excellent question. And a very practical one. It's like, hey, listen, I want to use like the abstract airline and my printer. How do I do that? Yes, how do you do that indeed? Yeah, but it's more about like my files. So let's go find that. What's the best way to do that? Let's just do that from the command line. Okay. Well, you're going to want it to end up in the in your main code. So just like with Maven, IntelliJ. Sorry. Let me talk about two more things. No. Let me talk about a couple more things first, and then we'll dive into that. But don't let me forget, because that's a super important detail. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So these are all the files. There are two files I didn't mention, and these are the two test files. So Android supports unit tests and integration tests, just like Maven. They're in different named directories and stuff. Okay, that's fine. But it looks a lot the same. You can have plain old JUnit tests. JUnit tests that test the logic of your program. That's cool. But there's also integration tests. Android refers to them as instrumented tests because what they do is they provide, well, they're not exactly mock objects, but they are implementations of certain APIs that allow you to still exercise your code, exercise your UI code. I'm not going to go into too much detail about them tonight. I want to save that for next time because it's more of an advanced topic. And to be honest, for this project, I want you to explore more about building an Android application than testing an Android application. And so as a result, I'm not going to measure code coverage for your Project 6, and so therefore you are not required to write unit tests, and honestly, I don't know how helpful they'd even be. This is, the chains are off. I don't know, whatever. Go have fun and hack around. It's more about learning about Android than it is building Android applications and test-driven development. Maybe in the future I'll do that, but today is not that day. So anyway, so you can have instrumented tests also. Now let's figure out how we can use my classes in this. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to copy some code. I'm going to copy stuff from just the plain old. Actually, wait. I'm going to copy stuff from I don't know, just airline, source main Java, edu, blah blah blah, all this stuff. Yeah, how about just my flight? That'll be good enough. So I'll copy that to Android calculator. Where's the code? App, source, main, Java. Great. Oh, no, don't copy over that. Okay, I'll copy that there. Go back to Android Studio. I'll refresh. Oh, look, it already did it. Flight, couple things. This is in the wrong package. Set package name to this. Okay. And it's like, what's this abstract flight? That's a good question. So what we need to do is we need to have your project depend on my code. So the way we did this in Maven is that we added a dependency, and there is a very similar mechanism for Gradle. So we go into our Gradle scripts, and gosh, there are so many of them. Build.Gradle? Okay, here's some dependencies, but I need to add a repository also. And I'm going to cheat and see what I did last year, because I can't remember what I did. So we will go to my GitHub. We will, not my triple work, github.com, Portland State Java, summer 2019. Yeah. And look at my Android application and look for, good, configure the project used by projects jar. And we will look at my last, where's the history? We'll look at the history, and we will look at the changes here. Okay. Oh, good. Okay, so there in app build.gradle, we need to add something that looks a lot like this. Okay, so what does this mean? So this is an app build.gradle, which is what I'm looking at. So there is a new implementation dependency. This will be winter 2020. So implementation is the source, is the main, I guess, for Maven. So the implementation is going to need my jar, and I need to tell it about my Maven repository. And here I put it under repositories, which is in build.gradle. Okay, of course. And that is the parent one, build.gradle. I don't get Gradle. Other people do, other people like it. I'm even too much of a Maven bigot. I don't know. Let's see here. Externally added files can be added to Git. Which ones are you talking about? Yeah. Thank you. I should probably just say always add, whatever. Okay, yes. Gradle files have changed since last project sync. Project sync may be necessary. Yes, please sync. But say what you want about Gradle. What does it not like? Affected modules going to resolve. Oh, really? Yeah, did you not see my new? Oh, I was about to say that. Let's see here. That looks right. Bin tray. Yeah, sure. I think that's right. Let's try it from the command line. See if Gradle does any better. From the command line. Oops. Oh, weird. PSU projects winter 2020. So what am I getting wrong here? And it's saying so it's got both of them. And oh wait, all projects versus the build script. Okay, I probably just put it in the wrong place because of course you got to put it in 2 places, and I'm sure if I knew anything about Gradle, that would be obvious to me. So we'll just put it in the right place this time. There we go. Try that. Sync your Gradle. You can use a project structure dialog to view and edit your project configuration. Thanks. Okay, it looks happier now. Oops. We'll build it here. Seems to be making much more progress. Oh, I didn't clean, but whatever. Okay, well that's what you need to do. You need to add it to the Gradle files. You need to save the dependency inside the app directory, and then the repository in the parent directory. Okay, well I don't need to watch it doing this thing. Look at all the threads that it's using. Everything's all going at once. So neat. Okay, well, let's check this stuff in. Actually, let's check it in 2 commits so you can find it easily. So let's see here. Add the necessary configuration to Gradle to use Dave's classes like abstract flight. Commit and push. Okay. Good question. Oh, I should add the flight class too. Oh well, I'll get it later. Okay, so that's that. Now let's start exploring the application a little bit more. Okay, calculator. Let's do the following. Just for the sake of example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the first activity have a button that when I click it, that will launch the calculator. Because I want to show you how to respond to a button click and launch another activity. Something you will probably want to do in your projects. So let's do that. Let's first add a button. Now, what happens if? Oh, actually, let's check in some of these files. Add a flight class and mess with some strings. Good. Okay. So here we are looking at our main activity, and we want to add a button to it. What happens if I just add a button? And I want to make the button. Okay, so the layout, width, and height. For something like a button, you want it to just be you want it to be the size that it prefers, which is wrap content, which means make me big enough to display my contents nicely. Wrap content. Let's see here. It's going to be up here at the top. Okay, that's fine. So now I've got button. I want some information about that button, so I can say things like text, and I want it to. I want the text to be launch calculator. It is complaining. Well, first of all, I spelled calculator wrong, but it's all highlighted in yellow because it's saying, "Wait, this should use a string resource." I'm like, "Thanks, thanks." And I won't call it IntelliJ, and you kind of are IntelliJ. But we'll extract a string resource, and it gives you some nice default values. Sure, go ahead and use that. Who cares? Nice. And so now when we relaunch it, it goes, it launches it, it reinstalls it. Yay. We got a button called Launch Calculator, and you click on it, it does nothing. That's surprising, because I didn't tell it what to do. Okay. Now, it's complaining about something is in red. If view is not constrained, it only has design time position, so it will jump to 0, 0 at runtime unless you add the constraints. Sure. Add some constraints, please? Oh, it doesn't tell me how to do that. Okay. It's probably like this layout constraint thing. I don't know how to use constraint layout, let's be honest. Okay, so let's change it. So I mean, it looks kind of dorky right now because it's like sitting there in the top. That's not cool. I want it to look cool. So, but maybe we'll come back and do that later. Okay, let's try that. Oh, it covers up the text view. Okay, let's see here. To the bottom of, oh yeah, I mean to the top of, I think what I can do, if I give this guy an ID and we'll call this, what do we need to do? We need to say plus ID hello. Does that work? And then can I say constraint top to the top of, I say ID hello. Does that work? Ooh, look at that. Okay, so now it's below there. That's not what I wanted necessarily, but it's like, okay, right? This is experimentation, and Dave doesn't really know what he's doing, and that's fine, right? It's not like I'm going to grade. So anyway, okay, you can do stuff like this. Yes. So really, what I should do is I should go look at this whole constraint layout thing and figure out how to use it. And my guess would be, let's go back to our Android documentation. Constraint layout. Look at all this good stuff. Well, there's various spellings of it, but let's just see what the first page gives us, or the first search gives us. Okay, here's build a responsive UI. Looks like there was some. So there's API documentation, and then there's sort of like just help pages and stuff. So build a responsive UI with constraint layout. Look, there you have a person who works for Google, likely, telling you all about how to use it. That's neat. And so you can go read about this. The documentation for Android is really good. I mean, this is all part of it, right? Where you've got people all over the world with various levels of experience, with programming, application development, and everything like that, who want to be able to use this. So they make it really easy. It's in everybody's best interest to make this approachable. So even though it might seem like, oh my gosh, this is something completely different from whatever I've done, there's lots of actually very high quality explanations of all of this stuff. So if you feel that you're rat holing or spiraling out of control, go ask the internet. It'll give you good guidance. Okay, hey, let's leave it like this, because why not? Okay, so I've got a button, and now what I want to do is I want to respond to what happens when you click that button. Every UI framework I've encountered has this notion of a listener or an event handler. So when the user interacts with a user interface, something called an event occurs. So it's like I click a button, I type on the keyboard, I drag something around. That interaction, that user interaction, is represented in the program as something called an event. In object-oriented programming languages, there's an object. I said, oh yeah, right. Here's an object that represents, the key that was, the key that was pressed, or the, basically the action taken. And those events are responded to. Those events must be handled by the program, right? So like the button widget that Google provides doesn't know what to do when the user clicks it. Your program must tell it what to do. And the way and it's not that it so much tells it what to do, is like your program says, here's how you should respond to a click on the button. And the way it does this is with an API, with this whole event handler API. So the way your XML is XML. It doesn't really, XML is lousy for writing instructions for code. That's good for Java. Java isn't so great for laying things out. So it's like the UI is declared in Java. It is, sorry, I'm going to close some of the stuff out because I am getting Lost. It is, what is it? Main activity, there it is. Flight, close that. Gradle, close that. There you go. I just want to go back and my activity. There you go. My activity, this is code, right? This is where it's good at acting with stuff. So here's what I want to do. I want to get a reference to the button I created here in my Java code. So what I'll do is I'll give it an ID, and I'll call it launch, I don't know, calculator. Okay, and now, okay. So there's this set content view, which represents, they say this, the r.layout.activity main. R is R a class? Is R an object? What is it? R is a class that has all of these static fields. And this is this magic class that is that the Android compiler creates that gives you references to everything in the resource directory, or well, almost everything in the resource directory. So you can say things like, r.layout will give you stuff in the layout directory. Drawable will give you stuff there. So there's IC launcher background and foreground. You have those XML files over here. r.string will give you stuff in the strings.xml. And these are all crazy integer IDs that then the Android runtime, or maybe even at compile time, I can't remember, will basically weave everything together. But for your needs, we'll need to do things like the following. So we'll have a button called launch calculator. And the way we get a reference to this is that we use a method called findByViewID, which is inherited from activity. And then we give it the ID. So r.id what do you call that? Launch calculator. So the Android compiler and then Android Studio on top of that, when you create an ID element for your button over here, it registers, and when you use the special syntax @+ID, so @+ID creates a new ID, as opposed to a reference. Well, I guess is that right? Okay, I didn't need to use plus down here. I should have just said @ID to reference it. So @+ is an instruction to say, or is an indicator to say create a new ID. You can then reference it in this magical Java class. And so now you've got a reference off to that button, and I want to do something with it. I want to say launch calculator. Now I want to say it even gives me. I want to put. I want to say, well, when we click this button, do something. And the way you do that is you set what's called an Onclicklistener. Onclicklistener has one argument, which is an object that implements the Onclicklistener interface. And so I'll say new, and so it requires an Onclicklistener. So I'll just say listener. I'll create a local variable here so I can show you what's going on. Okay. Now, listeners, the Onclicklistener class, here it's an interface, and it's got one method called onClick, right? Which basically says, hey, this is the contract between the Android API button and then your code. Where the Android API says, listen, I'm a button, I know I can be clicked, but I don't know what's supposed to happen when I'm clicked. But the application can tell me, and the way it's going to tell me is like, hey, give me an object that implements this Onclicklistener interface, and that object's onClick method will be whatever you do. So now what we need to do is we need to create something that implements Onclicklistener that will do what we want to do. In this case, we're going to say, I don't know, just like tell people I'm clicked. Tell user I was clicked. Okay. So now here we have a class. We'll create an inner class here. And it's saying, well, you need to implement a method. So onClicked. Okay, great. So onClick takes a view. That is, the view is the button that was clicked. We don't really care about which button was clicked. We just want to do something. What is this complaining about? Oh, maybe static. Yes, it may. Please make it static. Now what we want to do is we want to pop up a little message. There's an API called Snack Bar. Nope. How come I don't have a snack? Oh, maybe I don't have a snack bar in this. No. I don't have a snack bar? Oh, here we go. I have to add a dependency in order to get it, apparently. Okay. Yeah, snack bar. Snack bar is super cute. Snack bar dot make the view. Oops. And then, we can have I was clicked. And then duration, I think it's in milliseconds. And then show. So that'll pop up a snack bar. Let's rerun this and see. Now, I want to check it out. There are 2 ways to relaunch your app. They're up here. There's a little green arrow that has an A in it, and if I hold my mouse still, maybe it'll be, yeah. This is for when you just add some Java code. You don't change anything about your application. You don't change anything about your layout or whatever. It just deploys new Java code. I don't think that's the case here, but this is a nice quick way to restart your app when you're just modifying your code. Let's bring it up here. See how it's building a bunch of stuff. And you can tell it's building a bunch of stuff because Android Studio tells you so. Oh, it's complaining. Okay. We changed. Okay, it thinks the Android manifest was changed. That's not true, but it's saying, you got to reinstall and restart the whole app. Well, fine. Not the end of the world because it's still pretty quick because it's a very small app. Great. Now we've got it, and now when we click Launch Calendar, the little snack bar pops up and says, I was clicked. Does that for a second. Look at that. Okay, so now we've got this much. This is neat, but there's a language feature that I want to show off because it's very helpful with these listeners. Actually, I'm going to commit this code so we can see how it evolves over time because I'm sure everybody's going to go back and look at the Git history. Future generations will look at my... No, they won't. I don't think the current generation is going to do it either. But anyway, added an event handler that pops up a message when the button is clicked. Okay. Now, some Java language stuff. So you've got this. This works, but this is a lot of code, right? I had to create a whole class just for like 1 line of code. Seems kind of a waste. So there's a language feature called anonymous inner classes, and they introduced this feature really for this kind of programming. So instead of having to create a whole new class that implements this interface, I can just use some syntactic sugar to basically create a class that doesn't have a real name, Onclicklistener. And it's got, and here I basically say, hey, just create a new object, and that object is going to implement the Onclicklistener interface. And it's like, okay, great. What do you want your Onclicklistener, what do you want your Onclick method to do? Well, I want to do this. So I'll just do this. And now I can get rid of this class because I don't need it anymore. Safely delete it. Yes. Okay. And now I think I can do the soft relaunch because I didn't change any of the UI code, right? I had added the no. Oh, I'm disappointed. Changing class modifiers. Okay, fine. Okay. Someday I will have actually maybe sometime soon. No, I won't have an example for the next iteration. But now it relaunched. It's relaunching. Launch calculator. Yay, I was clicked. Bye. Okay. And the second part is super cute. Okay, well this is good. So now we'll use an anonymous inner class for the event handler. And I've got some slides on anonymous inner classes in the reflection lecture, maybe? I can't remember. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the reflection lecture. All about those, and that's neat. Okay, well, okay, this is cool, right? So we have we went and we got our button, and we added a click listener on it. There's another way to do this though that's even less code, and that works in many cases. So we can go back to our we can go back to our activity here, and you can register. And the buttons have an on-click property, and you can give it a method from the activity. So this is launch calculator, and it's saying, wait, there's no method called that. No, you're right, and so now I can create it. And so then this is basically the same thing as what your Onclicklistener does. And so I can just once again move my code down here. And now it's called view, not v, which I kind of like better anyway. And now I don't need any of this code here, and I no longer need to have an ID for this because I never refer to it by its ID. So less code. That's kind of nice. So let's try it one more time. Let's launch it. I need to do the full launch now, so I'm going to click the one on the right because I know I'm going to have to do the whole launch. Yay, it was installed successfully. Loads again. And yep, there it is. Still works. So you've got options there in terms of how you handle button events. This is probably the least amount of code. And there's some downsides. You don't necessarily know which button is going to call this. You kind of go back and forth between two files. So maybe that's not what you want to do. I don't have a strong preference either way. I just try to do stuff that works. So use the onClick attributes of button to register listener. Okay. You guys need a break, or do you want to keep going for a little bit longer? Use a break. Okay, let's take 10, and we'll do a little bit more Android, and then we'll go on to mobbing.